Good morning. Welcome to the second legislative forum in a series of 3 being sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Johnson County during the 2025 Iowa legislative session. My name is Barb Stein. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, and I will be moderating today. Our timekeeper today is Kathy Eisenhofer, also a League member. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to educating voters on political and ballot issues. We support informed citizen participation in government. The League does take positions after considerable study of issues and acts to influence decision makers on those issues. Membership is open to all genders, age 16 and older. We invite you to join us. We can use your time, your talent, and your financial resources. To learn more, speak to one of our members or reach out to us through our website or Facebook page. These forums are designed to give local citizens an opportunity to discuss current state legislative issues with their elected officials while the legislative session is underway. All Johnson County legislators were invited to participate. No responses were heard from Senator Driscoll, Representative Hora, or Representative Lawler. Today's forum focuses on issues related to the environment and water quality. I would like to introduce our legislators. Senators in order of seniority: Zach Walls, District 43, Janice Weiner, District 45, Dave Jacoby, District 86, Amy Nielsen, District 85. She's not here today, she's sick. Eleanor Levin, District 89, Adam Zobner, District 90. We will start the forum with 3-minute summaries from each of our legislators on recent legislative matters of interest to them individually, starting with Zach Walls, District 43.
Well, thank you very much. Is this on? Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Do I have to hit this?
I don't know.
Is that working? Is that working? Thumbs up from the back there. Okay, great. First of all, good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see all of you. Thank you all so much for coming out to Coralville. Dave and I provided the donuts in the back to say thanks for coming back to Coralville. Please eat them. I can't take them all home with me. Our bills are moving fast and furious in the legislature right now. We're about 2 weeks away from the first funnel, which is the first legislative deadline for legislation. And so I think all of us have had probably more subcommittees than I can count in the last week. And a few things that I want to make sure that we call your attention to. Earlier this week, Iowa Republicans introduced and passed out of subcommittee Senate Joint Resolution 6, SJR 6. SJR 6 would amend the Iowa Constitution to remove IWIL, the Natural Resource and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund that was approved by voters back in 2010. The trust, despite having never been funded, does still exist and would be a mechanism for raising the revenue that's needed to do all kinds of important outdoor conservation projects. And so the fact that Republicans are now trying to amend our state constitution and overturn the will of 62% of Iowa voters, including myself, who voted in favor of it back in 2010, is something that I think all of us should be very concerned about. To my knowledge, there's not a parallel effort happening in the House at the moment.
Not so far.
So hopefully we'll be able to stop this in the Senate before it gets out of our chamber, but I would strongly encourage everybody in this room to contact the members who are on that committee to encourage them to reject it from passing. One piece of legislation that I just filed this week, I've heard from multiple constituents on this one. This is kind of a small technical bill, but essentially, anyone in this room own an electric vehicle? Okay, so several years ago, my first year in the legislature, there was this ongoing discussion. Electric vehicles were kind of still relatively new, but we're growing rapidly. Our road use trust fund is basically funded. This is the money that we use to improve our roads and bridges here at the state level. Is funded by the gas tax. And obviously, if you drive an electric vehicle, you don't pay the gas tax. And so there was some conversation about how do we create some equity here. The fee that was initially set all those years ago was ridiculously high. And so, if you're driving a small passenger EV, you're still paying roughly the same amount in fees that you would if you were driving the EV Hummer, which does not really make a lot of sense. And so this is a bill that would essentially create a tiered structure that would say that the amount of annual fee you pay for an EV is tied to the amount of weight of the vehicle. It's a relatively small thing, but something that I've heard a lot about from constituents. So excited to see if we're able to get that moving this year.
Good morning. Thank you for being here today. It's great to be here in Coralville City Council chambers. I was trying to think of what to say for an opening statement today. There's so much running around in my head that I actually wrote some stuff down this time. We're continuing to work in the Capitol to preserve our institutions, our state institutions, to try and preserve our freedoms, to offer Iowans opportunity, and to hold those who've been in control for over 8 years now accountable. It's particularly disappointing that our colleagues aren't here today, that some of our colleagues aren't here today, not just because we're Democrats and they're Republicans, but because we're all Iowans and we're all Americans, and there's a heck of a lot going on right now that really impacts us all as Iowans and Americans. So Senate Democrats are going to continue to work on things like wages and housing and family leave and child care and public schools and unemployment and clean water. We're going to continue to defend against what I call the hate wars, like a bill that's this coming week in the House and probably soon coming in the Senate that would strip gender out of the Iowa Civil Rights Code, and then who knows what after that. We will continue to fight for funding for cancer research, just as we're fighting on the federal level to keep NIH funding here, because we all know that we shouldn't be holding big corporations like Bayer, giving them a free pass because we have a cancer plague in this state. We're second highest in the nation and the only rising cancer rate, and what's now referred to as the Cancer Gag Act should not be allowed to go forward. And at the same time, even as I represent the state, we can't keep our eyes away from what's going on in Washington, because it does impact Iowans too. When we no longer have a military that has civilian command and judge advocates general to interpret what that means legally, it impacts Iowans. When Republicans in Washington are trying to pass a budget that's going to strip money from Medicaid and SNAP, how will Iowans deal with that? 50% of Iowans in nursing homes are on Medicaid. A lot of births in Iowa are paid for thanks to Medicaid. What is going to happen to our rural hospitals without Medicaid, those that are already left? And kids need SNAP to eat. They're also unlikely to extend telehealth for Medicare after March 31st. That's a huge problem. What are folks in rural areas going to do? Iowans who are disabled, those who are caregivers, or without transportation, how are they going to get to their appointments? They won't. When researchers are fired from Iowa State who are doing important work on ag and bird flu, that's a problem for Iowans. When NIH grants are throttled here at the University of Iowa, and all our data is being sucked up by people in Washington who shouldn't have it, that's a problem for Iowans. So I could go on, and I probably will later. But please know that we will continue to do our very best in Des Moines to stand up for Iowans and all our interests, both as they impact the state level and as they intersect with the federal level. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Jacoby.
Thank you. That was a great presidential speech. Sign up there. Thank you so much for being here this morning. My name is Dave Jacoby, state representative. We're here in Coralville in Western Iowa City. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee. I'm the ranking member. I also serve on Natural Resources, Higher Education, and Government Oversight. Strangely, under Governor Reynolds, government oversight has not yet met. So, and I'd like to welcome you also, again, as Zach did, to Coralville. I also want to welcome you to opposite world, because today we learned that Ukraine invaded Russia, And we're also learning over the last week when we're in Natural Resources Committee and others that clean water has nothing to do with the cancer rates in Iowa. My wife told me not to swear this morning, so I have to stop for a second. But I know that, we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing with the environment today, and I look forward to that discussion. Just to close out, as the ranking member on Ways and Means, and seeing the number of bills that have come through since 2013 on property taxes, and in all due honesty, not a single one has worked worth a darn that I propose this year, and I will be discussing it with fellow Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate, that if we really want to have property tax relief, then we need to be responsible for it. In other words, at the state level, we should give everyone a $1,000 rebate check, because the cities, counties, and schools are paying millions of dollars for unfunded mandates that are brought upon them by the state. Then the state should back that up and give every homeowner a $1,000 rebate and every renter a $500 rebate. That, I think, will be the first time in over a decade that we truly see some property tax relief for people. But I look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you very much. Let's see, we've got Eleanor Levine from District 89.
Good morning. Thank you so much to the League for hosting. Thank you to the co-sponsoring organizations. As y'all know, environmental and water quality issues are paramount to me. So I personally serve as the ranking member on government oversight. Technically, we had one meeting, Dave. We just introduced ourselves and went home. I serve on our education committee and our education budget subcommittee, which are two that take up a good deal of my time. You might notice the word education in the top right corner of a lot of bills. I serve on natural resources, where we do hear presentations and we hear the questions that come out of those presentations, which are often even more interesting to me. I serve on Public Safety, Veterans Affairs, and the International Relations Committee with Senator Weiner. That's a joint committee where we heard a really, in my view, valuable and important presentation from Lutheran Services. I've been pushing for 3 years now to have some conversations about immigration and refugee services in Iowa, and I hate that we got it because someone at the federal level sent a tweet, but I was happy to see that conversation begin at the State House. I wanted to mention today that the first bill I filed this year was House Joint Resolution 3. I have a number of co-sponsors, and it enacts the right to a clean environment here in Iowa. This is something that we vitally need. It is something that other states have done. It's something that would allow the people of Iowa to make claims on behalf of their own future. And so this is something that I really feel strongly about and that I will continue to advocate for, no matter how long I serve into the Iowa legislature, until we get it done. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Adams Abner, District 90.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us today. I'm Adam Zabner. I represent House District 90, which is downtown Iowa City, the north and the east side. A couple of things that have happened in the last couple weeks. A few weeks ago, Republicans in the Iowa House passed their school funding bill that continues to underfund public education and fail to meet the rising costs that our schools are seeing. In fact, that bill provided a 44% increase in funding for the school voucher program, but only a 2.25% increase for our public schools. Also this week, Governor Reynolds said that she would not allow our state auditor to audit those hundreds of millions of dollars that are being spent every year now on the school voucher program. This year, the richest family in Des Moines will be able to send their kid to private school on the taxpayer dime, and there's no accountability or auditing to ensure that that money is actually being spent on education. Also this week, Iowa House Democrats introduced our affordable housing package. I was really excited about this. It's probably the #1 issue I hear about from my friends, that I hear about when I'm talking to folks in my district, knocking doors, is just the rising cost of housing here in Johnson County. A couple of things our bills would do: they'd help existing homeowners get some grants to do repairs and be able to stay in their home. It would help leverage federal money for affordable housing. So I was very excited to see that. And Senator Walz and I have been doing some other work on affordable housing that I'm really excited to talk about in the coming weeks here. 2 climate bills that maybe don't sound like climate bills, but I think they are, that have subcommittees this week, and I would ask you to pay attention to. Number 1, on Wednesday morning, we'll have a subcommittee on a committee bill in local government where I'm the ranking member that would allow Johnson County to explore regional transit authority. I think this would be a really, really great thing for our bus system here in the county to be able to connect the different communities. And then the second one is a bill around allowing accessory dwelling units in the state of Iowa. Where I live on the north side, the amount of housing that is actually accessible for people with disabilities is very, very low. And so allowing folks to build those accessory dwelling units, increasing our density, I think that's a climate issue, but it's also another affordable housing issue. So very excited to have those 2 subcommittees on Wednesday.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your updates on legislative issues. At this time, we will begin with questions, starting with one from the League. And since some of you already took my question, I have to change. This is a little bit repetitive, but it gets at a little bit different issue. Iowa ranks 2nd in the nation for newly reported cancers. The Iowa Environmental Council reports that the risks of nitrate in Iowans' drinking water is not being reduced with the farmers' voluntary conservation practices. Research in the past decade provides evidence that long-term exposure to nitrate at levels even below the current rule of 10 milligrams per liter can be linked to the increased risk of birth defects, colorectal cancer, and bladder cancer. Yet we do not hear much about reducing that level. Are there any bills that might lead to better management of nitrate level in our water? What can citizens do to draw attention to the impact of nitrate in our drinking water?
So there are a couple things here. So first of all, there's been legislation introduced in the Senate that Senator Weiner took the lead on in terms of appropriation on cancer research through work here. Obviously, there's, I think, huge questions around the federal government's decision to freeze and cut a lot of NIH, NSF funding that is really important for actually providing the support for that research, which is a huge problem. I mean, the immediate threat at the moment is for sure the Republican attempts to axe Iowa. That's one thing that I think we already talked about that a little bit, but again, I would strongly encourage every person in this room to contact legislators to urge them to reject this legislation before it gets out of committee, let alone to the floor. Because even though the trust fund hasn't been funded yet, you know, its simple existence means that every time there's a conversation about tax policy in the state, that is a part of the conversation. And so I'm confident that if it remains on the books, it will eventually get funded. And so I think those are the key things right now that are right in front of us. I'm not personally aware of any legislation that Republicans have introduced to try and ameliorate this. So, you know, at this point, you know, I'm not holding my breath. But I think the thing that we can do, there's, I think, strong bipartisan support to protect Iowa. And that's where I think our energy over the next few weeks should really be focused.
There's one bipartisan sponsored bill. It may seem like a small thing, but in the House, led by State Representative Tracy Ellert out of Lynn County, that would designate Triple Negative Breast Cancer Action and Awareness Day as March 3rd annually. This is a personal issue for her as she spent the past 18 months battling triple negative breast cancer. But these kinds of awareness and action events can be really productive in bringing stories to light, in making sure that people are aware and not letting folks fall by the wayside and not just letting our rates rise without any accompanying rise in action.
Just 2 things about cancer. First of all, we have access to the HPV vaccine now, you know, literally a vaccine that stops people from getting cancer. I don't know what more we could ask for. And Republicans are pushing anti-vaccine legislation that would make it harder for people to get that vaccine. I can't think of anything more wrong-headed than, having fewer people get vaccinated with a vaccine that prevents cancer. The second thing, our community here in Johnson County received $190 million in funding last year from the National Institutes of Health to study very important diseases, including cancer. And there's groundbreaking research being done here in our community to help people with cancer and also to look at prevention. Donald Trump, through his actions, has put that research in jeopardy. Thousands of jobs, thousands of spin-off companies. And, our federal representatives to this point have said nothing. And I think that is deeply disappointing. We're here at a public meeting where folks can ask us questions. To my knowledge, Representative Miller Meeks has not held or scheduled a public meeting this year. And I think that's really problematic when we're talking about $190 million that comes into our community to make the world a better place when it comes to diseases like cancer.
So specifically to the point on nitrogen, however weak it may be, the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy was just updated this year for the first time since 2017. It's supposed to have been updated to include an extended 3-year rotation, and it reflects increased access to data and new practices, including a precision ag tool to optimize and reduce nitrogen application. I don't know to what extent it will be helpful, but it is the first update in 8 years to it, and it focuses on nitrogen. I also did introduce a bill that was introduced last year as well on both sides that has to do with protecting the riparian areas to reduce flow. So that, because it won't go anywhere, but it's in there. So there's a variety of things going on, but a lot of them aren't in the legislature. I'd really refer you to the case that most of you know about that Jim LaRue has prosecuted and continues to work on, because I think that's a very important effort that he's undertaking with respect to the porous karst area. But and he gave the DNR a chance to respond. They didn't, so now he's taken it to district court. So we need to use every tool in our toolbox.
2010, I will. Wow, I was so young and exuberant there. Think, wow, we're gonna have some solutions. Just a slight corrections. Iowa's number 1 in the cancer rate in the country. We are number 1. We are number 1 by far by incident of population. Frankly, the government has suppressed the numbers for a couple of years, the exact same way the COVID numbers were repressed and not properly reported. We are number 1 in the nation in incidence of cancer. What's frustrating for me is the number of things we learned from the 2008 flood, the number of things we learned about what's in the groundwater, what's in the soil, especially because the nature of that flood was different than in 93 when the rains come straight down on top of you. These are rains on the watershed from the northwest that flow to the southeast. And we learned what was in that water and where it was coming from. We learned what we needed to do, and we haven't been successful in doing anything in remediating that.
In terms of the advocacy portion of the question, I think particularly with relation to the cancer rates, keep in mind that someone who's in the middle of battling cancer is not necessarily in a position to be the best advocate because they're dealing with a whole lot. And so if you see someone and you know someone, tell those stories. Bring those stories to your legislators. Bring those stories to the Department of Health and Human Services. Bring those departments to the DNR when they have opportunities for comment, because we can't rely on folks who are battling for their lives to also be the ones advocating.
Okay, thank you all. Now it's time for audience questions.
Barb, can I
did somebody not speak?
One brief.
Sorry.
Janice, have we filed Cindy's constitutional amendment on citizen referenda yet.
Oh, we have it.
If she hasn't yet, she will have.
And we have it in the
soon.
House.
Yes, Senate Democrats and House Democrats are going to be introducing an amendment to the Constitution that would allow for citizen referenda. This has obviously been an issue that the only way currently that citizens get a vote is if you have an actual constitutional amendment, which can be very difficult to pass through the legislature. And obviously, this would be a very long-term strategy, but figuring out some way to use citizen initiatives as a way to actually get IWIL funded and to create some of these requirements that would be useful in cleaning up the water is, I think, another long-term piece of the puzzle.
That's HJR 5 in the House.
Yep, thanks. Thanks, Barb.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's okay.
Okay, we will now accept questions from the audience. We will start with the representatives from the invited groups. So the Grannies and Climate Advocates, Silt, and Sierra Club. So the Grannies would be first.
Good morning. I'm Deb Schollerman from
You
the
can line up
100
at the-
Grannies.
Speak up.
Is it on? Oh, turn it on.
I don't know, but I can't hear you.
Is it now? Is this better?
Speak up. Speak way up.
Yes, is it on or not? Did I yell?
It might be
It
on
might
for
be
the
working for
online.
the TV crew, but it's not.
Okay. Okay. So,
Broadcasting
Deb Schollerman from the 100 Grannies. Again, a water question. There, and I have another one later if we have time. We have over 800 impaired waterways in Iowa. We know by now that voluntary efforts have not been effective in reducing water pollution. The proposed clean water bill states that medium and large CAFOs must have a water pollution permit to monitor waste released into the waterways. A CAFO moratorium bill would stop new CAFOs as well as expansion on existing facilities. We all know that the Republicans have the majority and they support Big Ag. But do you see anything happening within either of these bills, and what action steps can we take?
So I know I'm a co-sponsor on the Clean Water Bill that was introduced by Representative Kurth in the House. I was a co-sponsor on it last year when Representative Stade, who is now Senator Stade, introduced it in the House, and he has also introduced it in the Senate. I had an interesting interaction about 2 days into the legislative session before that bill was even live. I think before it was even out of drafting, a Republican state representative came up and asked me about it because a number of folks had come to her local forum and asked her about it. And they had mentioned that I was one of the names that they had heard as somebody who might be introducing it. And she came over and asked me about it. And I got her a copy of it, and she read through it. And she's at least considering it because people from her local community came and asked her to. That, to me, is a hopeful point and a reproducible action, right? When we find folks, when we have communities that are built across the state that have folks from different communities that can go to their local legislators and say, this is something I care about and this is who you can talk to about it, it can make a difference.
I mean, I think that's sort of the way forward. What Representative Levin is saying right now is that it's going to have to be people across the state talking to folks who are not us in a blue area saying, our water is polluted, we don't like this, we don't like the stench, we don't like whatever it is, it needs to be fixed.
There's a bill that I'm the lead Democrat on in the House that would make oxbow restoration and wetland restoration an essential county purpose. And what that would mean would be that counties could use funds without going to a referendum to do those things for flood mitigation.
That's a good one.
Obviously, they also help water quality. It came from Representative Jones, whose district up in northwest Iowa experienced really horrible flooding this year and needs flood mitigation. We were able to get it out of subcommittee, and then the Farm Bureau showed up and essentially started pressuring Republicans, and so it's now in limbo in the local government committee. So I think one really important action would be to reach out to other members of the House Local Government Committee and ask them to support that bill. I think oxbow and wetland restoration is a really positive step we could take on water quality.
First of all, thank you all for giving up your time on a Saturday to be here to hear your constituents and answer questions that we have. You know, it's really uncertain times right now, and this is really important to us. I'm Brianna Horsey, and I'm the director of the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, also known as SILT. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that is preserving land for growing healthy food in a sustainable way in and around our communities in Iowa. We cover the whole state, and we've been impacted by the recent federal funding freezes and expect to lose most of our funding. So the support for organizations like ours, and it's happening all across the state, it's really gonna fall to our local and state governments to support us and get us through this time so that we can continue our efforts in the state. My question is, with the recent loss of these grant funds that have supported our land trust, what steps are you taking to ensure continued funding for conservation programs and sustainable initiatives in Iowa and in your community?
Can you share more about the funding that you're losing or that's been jeopardized?
Sure, yeah, we're supported by 3 different federal grants. So all 3 of them are through the USDA. One of them is a land access grant that supports 3 staff within our organization and 3 staff through subgrantees. And so with that funding, we're doing work in Des Moines, Waterloo, and Cedar Rapids, and we support regional coordinators within our organization to work with landowners who want to protect their land for growing food. We also support 3 full-time staff through our subgrantees. So we work with organizations in each of those communities that provide land or farm business navigators that work directly with farmers, producers that are growing food in their communities to access the resources that they need to build their business and be successful and access funding. We have another federal grant that is through the Farmers Market Promotion Program that is allowing us to help promote local goods around our communities and support the farmers. And our third federal grant is through SARE. That's the only federal grant that we have right now that isn't frozen.
How do you spell that?
SARE. And with that grant, we're doing research with our farmers and producers in Iowa to address their needs and barriers so that we can provide resources to them.
So the first 2 are both frozen and the third one's not yet.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it is an issue across the board right now with nonprofits. For example, I know that the Iowa Soybean Association has a sort of a subsidiary nonprofit it works with that's worked with farmers across a number of states to get to on conservation measures that were funded or supposed to be funded under the Inflation Reduction Act. They were keeping it quiet for a while, but then they went public. Farmers are out about $11 million right now, and in money they put in based on the understanding and essentially a contract with the U.S. government under this program as you have. So all these are contracts. They should be legal, you want to talk about the rule of law right now, but they should be legally enforceable. And I've been having conversations with actually the Farm Bureau lobbyist at the Capitol, and they are taking the same message directly to the White House right now that any of these contracts that have been agreed to and signed off on for agriculture with farmers, for farm research, that where people are out money, they need to abide by them, and that's sort of it's also a government-wide issue. But just so that you know, that's happening, including through organizations who, like the Soybean Association and some folks in the Farm Bureau, who you may not automatically think of as normal allies. There's a lot of cross-cutting issues right now, but we'll continue to talk to them and try and get updates. and hope that that will have an impact on organizations like yours as well. But contracts are contracts, and if contracts are being broken on a one-sided basis, then then people ought to be able to sue. There ought to be even class action lawsuits, or, we don't have the rule of law anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. They know that we cannot sustain for that length of time to fight it in the long run. 4 weeks of frozen funds and cash flow is really disruptive to small organizations. So I appreciate your advocacy.
I would say one of the things that we are able to do is to sit down and have quiet conversations with our colleagues. I have had some conversations where I've sat down with folks because I've heard about programs and impacts in their local areas. And so I start from the, here's what I'm hearing about in my area, and I heard about something that might be impacting your folks too. Have you heard about this? To try and and then some of those folks have then contacted our federal representatives, which I assume would carry a little more weight than when, they hear from me over and over and us over and over. So.
I think it's important to be very clear about what's happening. They've started budget negotiations in the United States Senate. There was an amendment from a Democrat a couple nights ago to not cut the taxes of people who make over $100 million in a year. I don't know. Is there anyone in the room who made $100 million last year? If so, talk to me after. But, they are cutting taxes for Trump and his billionaire buddies on the back of Iowans and really important programs that impact the lives of Iowans. And so that's what's happening here. Unfortunately, the same thing has been happening in the state of Iowa for about 10 years. And so we've seen pretty much a flat budget for the Department of Natural Resources. We've seen tax cuts for the richest Iowans. Well, middle-class Iowans and poor Iowans don't really see very big reductions in taxes. And so it's very difficult to have a conversation about backfilling any loss of federal funds when Iowa Republicans have prioritized tax cuts for the richest Iowans, and obviously U.S. Senate Republicans and Donald Trump are now doing the exact same thing.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Is that Climate Advocates next?
Yes. Hi, I'm Peter Rolnick with Iowa City Climate Advocates. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
So, as you've already alluded to, extreme weather is hitting Iowa hard with increased frequency and intensity of storms, floods and drought and the costs they incur, and increased insurance rates, and in some places loss of insurance coverage. We need to reduce emissions dramatically in the next few years, and there is a lot that can be done, and new ideas are being developed every day. Examples include upgrading the grid to a two-way street model to accommodate distributed storage, or developing geothermal energy and installing more car charge ports across the state. And importantly, we need to safely streamline our regulations to facilitate these things happening. So what are your ideas for making these things happen in Iowa as soon as possible?
Peter, thanks for the question. There's a bill, there's two bills, one in the House, one in the Senate, that have been introduced. The governor in her condition of the state speech talked about the need for pretty significant energy overhaul in the state. For the last several years, there's been efforts underway to give the Iowa Utilities Board more regulatory power in how they regulate the investor-owned utility monopolies, Mid-American and Alliant in particular, through something called integrated resource planning. One of the things that this would allow utility to do would basically to say to the utilities, like, you need to build more solar generation if you're going to keep building so much wind. I'm all in favor of building out more wind, but in order to make sure that we're actually meeting the needs of Iowa ratepayers, you need a little bit of balance in how those are being built. Thankfully, I have not seen anything this year that would be a solar moratorium. There have been attempts by Republicans in the past to try and do that, and I haven't seen any this year, which is great news. There's a bunch of stuff that's in this bill in addition to the integrated resource planning. But I think one of the key things that would also be in the bill is trying to create more regulatory certainty so that these utilities can continue to invest in renewable generation. And that would be, I think, as you may or may not know, there's been a huge amount of uncertainty from the IUB on some of the approval for permitting in this space. And so getting some clarity in code would actually be really beneficial for expanding generation. And so I think that's going to be one bill to watch. I don't remember the number of the bill off the top of my head. I'll pull it up here in a second while others are chiming in. But I think that would be one place where I would strongly encourage everybody in this room who cares about climate issues to be reaching out to legislators who are on that legislation. It's in the Senate Commerce Committee. I presume it's in the House Commerce Committee as well. And that's where the legislation is going to be.
Thank you. That's good.
Integrated resource planning, I think, is going to be really key. I think there are also companion bills on community solar right now.
Yep.
In both the House and the Senate, also in the Commerce Committee, which would also be a positive step forward.
Yeah, we passed a community solar bill unanimously out of the Commerce Committee a couple weeks ago now, which is a really great step. That would allow Iowans to pay into large-scale solar and then receive the benefits. I think household solar is great, but there's obviously benefits to utility-scale solar that you can't really get on a household. The other thing I think is important, we have 10 counties in the state of Iowa now where you essentially cannot build a renewable energy project. I think that's wrong. I have legislation drafted that would say, here are the maximum siting requirements you can have for wind and solar. But I think it's crazy to let 10 counties completely ban these projects that could impact all Iowans.
I learned a lot about microgrid technology and about the improvements that have been made to battery storage that are now making it possible for generated energy that is not coming from fossil fuels to power us through the night, to power us through the day, to power us through whatever comes our way. Montezuma, Iowa received a grant they were approved in March of 2024 to become the first microgrid in Iowa, and I've been kind of following that project. It seems to be a little stalled at the moment. I can't imagine why. But I'm looking forward to when those folks are able to kind of show the impact that has on their schools, on their municipal buildings, and on their residents' lives. I'm hoping that that's a model that other communities will be able to follow. It has it has great potential for municipalities like Coralville and Iowa City. It's so much greater for small towns and rural areas like Montezuma. And I'm really excited to learn more about that and see how that project progresses.
Thank you, Peter. Welcome to the strange bedfellows show. Because what's happening now with insurance companies is more people are being awakened to climate change, whether they wanted to recognize it or not. When they first get that letter that says, your homeowners is being canceled in 60 days, and people do a little research and say, well, why is that? Well, because of the natural events that have happened in your zip code. And that's how they're boiling it down. In zip code where I live, I lost my homeowners coverage and had to go to a different company.
Wow.
Because it's by zip code and by claims and by all the actuarial science. But the actuarial science, I think, is going to help us. Because now I think people are paying a little more attention to the climate change. Now, car insurance is going the same route. I have a feeling it's probably because of the way my daughters drive more than climate. But yeah, I think it's going to help us in the long run because people are paying attention that weren't necessarily paying attention just a few months ago. With solar, every year we deal with the solar tax credits and whether we couple or decouple with the federal tax credits. Now, the uncertainty at the federal level leaves us hanging in the DC arena, but the least we could do in Iowa is couple our tax credits for more than 1 year at a time. So people that are adding or developing solar for residential don't have to have that question, check the box or not check the box every year.
There's one thing I would add on the federal piece too. So as you're well familiar, the Inflation Reduction Act provided a massive amount of subsidies to Americans all over the country who took the step to put in appliances that were more efficient. My wife and I had our furnace go out after 25 years after it was installed in our home a few weeks ago. And so we had it replaced with a heat pump, which is eligible for like a $2,000 tax credit, which is good because those things ain't cheap. Now, there's an open question at this point as to whether or not that tax credit will still be around in 10 months, and I'm able to actually claim it on my taxes next year. So I've already reached out to Senator Grassley's office as a constituent to make sure that they know that that's something that I'm watching, and I would make sure that all of us are reaching out to our federal delegation to make sure that the tax credits that a lot of Iowans are currently using to make energy efficient improvements to their homes are not on the chopping block, or that they're at the very least included, grandfathered in if there are any budget cuts that involve getting rid of those tax credits.
Thank you.
Is there a person coming up? Okay.
Hi, I'm Barbara Boma, and I'm representing Sierra Club.
Speak up, please.
And the question that I have, that I brought, was not written by me, but I had agreed to write it, but I forgot my glasses. So I'm going to do the best I can here. The governor's energy bill, which I don't know anything about, is especially onerous, odious, and
I'm pretty sure it's complimentary.
Okay, let me I have my glasses.
there's still more adjectives in there.
Yeah. Where are you?
Whole list
Number
of
one?
adjectives for that bill.
Okay, question number 1. The governor's energy bill is especially onerous, odious, and obnoxious in many ways. Who wrote this? The non-contested integrated resource plan will leave out public input and lead to high rates. The incentives for nuclear reactors will bring back the most dirty, dangerous, and expensive type of energy. And biodigesters will encourage more and more larger CAFOs. What Iowan taxpayers are asking for, increased pollution and higher gas and electric rates? That is, okay, what Iowan taxpayers are asking for, increased pollution, higher gas and electric rates. Question 2, a separate bill, HF 404, supports community solar projects, which is good for citizens without homes or those whose homes are not compatible with solar panels. Even though utilities oppose it, does this bill have a good chance of passing this year? Can I go? I am.
The microphone is not.
Here, I can repeat the question. So the first question was about the governor's energy bill and some criticisms that the Sierra Club has of it. And the second question was about community solar, which the Sierra Club supports, and whether or not it'll pass. We talked about community solar earlier. I'm very excited that it passed unanimously out of the House Commerce Committee, and I'm hoping that this is the year we get it to the floor. There's all types of people, like renters, who can't necessarily access household scale solar that would be benefited by a community solar legislation. On the governor's energy bill, it's a really long, complicated bill, and there's a lot in there, and there's pieces that I like and pieces that I don't like. I did vote against it last week, and really for me what it comes down to is this. You know, we had a week where it was negative 10 degrees, and I think what most Iowans were thinking was, what is my energy bill going to look like at the end of the month? The governor's bill does not give those Iowans a seat at the table when it comes to making decisions about the future of Iowa's energy policy and ensuring that their needs are met and that rates go down. That's why I voted against it. I think that there will still be a lot of changes to this bill. It's definitely not ready for prime time, and so it may change, and my view on it may change, and I want to be clear about that. But I think for me, the most important thing after an election cycle where almost every door I knocked, people talked about affordability, is making sure that Iowa ratepayers have a seat at the table and, you know, that their energy costs go down and that they're not worrying on a week like this, especially those who live in Alliant territory, how much is my bill going to be at the end of the month?
So the version of this bill in the Senate is Senate Study Bill 1112, and in the House it's House Study Bill 123. So that's super easy to remember. As Representative Zabner mentioned, there are a lot of different provisions of this bill. I think there's like 9 divisions or something like that. I mean, it's a very comprehensive piece of legislation. I share the Sierra Club's concerns about non-contested case resource planning. For those of you who aren't utility law experts, which I think is most of us, essentially what integrated resource planning is it says to all it's a process that's led by the utility, but it involves the utility board and then all of the various stakeholders, which include organizations like Sierra Club, like the Iowa Environmental Council and others, and they basically sit down and say, okay, here are all the resources, i.e. the generation, the transmission, the distribution, right, that we have in our system. We want to go through a planning process, and this is going to take more than a minute, sorry, Kathy. We need to go through our planning process in an integrated way to make sure that everybody understands what we are planning to do over the next however many years, how all of these pieces are going to work together. There are a lot of states across the Midwest and across the country that use resource planning as a tool to try and create some stability and predictability about how these resources are going to be utilized by the utility and by our communities. A few years ago, there was a lot of energy around this topic in the Iowa legislature, and so the legislature, because it was unable to come to a conclusion on what it wanted to do, did one of its favorite things, which is that we commissioned a study. The study, we hired some very fancy consultants and economists. They went out and did a bunch of research. They came back. They brought us like a 250-page report that I'm sure a total of 4 people read. But the primary recommendation in this 200-and-some page report was that we need to do integrated resource planning. All right, that's integrated resource planning. What is a contested case? When you have a contested case before the Iowa Utilities Board, essentially you have a legal proceeding that involves like lawsuits being filed. Now, they're not like a traditional lawsuit where, you know, this all happens within the legal structure of the Iowa Utilities Board. But it has the legal binding power of law. So the arguments that are being made and the facts that are being determined and the outcomes that are being decided all happen in the setting of like a literal legal proceeding. If you have, and this is what's currently in the governor's bill, a non-contested case, basically the utility decides what it's going to do, and the rest of everybody else, we're just making suggestions, right? So that's the distinction. So Representative Zabner is absolutely right that we want a contested case version, if at all possible, in the IRP process, because that's what's going to actually give us the ability, give us a real voice in the determination of what's ultimately going to happen. So I totally agree with that. To the second question, the second part of the question, which was I think about nuclear power, you know, there may just be some differences of opinion on this. I personally have more concerns about coal-powered fire plants than I do about turning Dwayne Arnold back on. We're at a point now where we need to retire the remaining Mid-American coal plants. We need to do it as fast as we possibly can, and if that means turning Dwayne Arnold back on and retrofitting that, if that means expanding our solar, our wind, then like that's what we need to do. And so that's personally my view on the nuclear situation. And then on the digesters, you know, there was a bill a couple years ago that you know, essentially began some pilot projects. I think the idea that this is ever going to be more than a very, very narrow amount of manure being processed, I think is wrong. Just transporting manure is very expensive because it's heavy. And so I'm not sure that I agree with the characterization that it's going to lead to a massive explosion of CAFOs more than we already have. But I also don't think that it's a weird thing to be including in the governor's bill, and I don't think it should be in here. I just don't think it's really going to, it's not relevant to everything else that's in the bill in terms of the scope and scale of what the governor's proposing. Sorry, I know that we just blew through the 2 minutes there, but it's a complicated topic.
You covered what I was going to say, so you can have my time. Cede my time.
All right.
I cede my time.
Cede my time to the senator.
If anybody wants to talk more about this, I'm happy to chat afterwards over a
Zach has thoughts.
This is why in the House we have time limits.
Do we have other questions from the audience? Deb, you had a second one you wanted to ask? Yeah.
Okay,
line up
is this good? Am I talking
So
into
the
it?
microphone is not projecting to the
Yeah,
room,
it's
it's
not
projecting
working. You
to
have
the
to
news.
really
to
Okay,
the
so okay now?
City channel.
Okay. Okay, all right, I will do my best. Okay, so this is a question about the Jordan Aquifer. So there's been some articles and information about Summit's 31 ethanol plants and how much water they use, over 3 billion gallons of water a year. And some of us on Thursday heard Stratus talk at his senior college, Stratus Junior Kuros talk. So there are many data centers from Phoenix are moving up to Iowa because of our wind energy. It's lower electrical prices, and they can get the water. They want the clean water. They don't want to use gray water. So the question is there any conversation on regulation of how much water can be taken out of the Jordan aquifer? Because aquifers are not replenishable.
Yeah, Deb, it's a great question, and honestly, that should be a part of the conversation. Because I mean, by the way, just to be very clear, the governor's utility bill is very well understood as a data center bill. I mean, fundamentally, I think that if you're looking at what's happening behind the scenes, what's happening is you have this explosion in artificial intelligence. You have these big tech firms, Microsoft, Google, Facebook. They're all in this race to build, you know, the most advanced artificial intelligence models. That requires a lot of data centers that they're using to train these AI deals, and they require a lot of energy. And so that's part of what's been fueling this conversation in Iowa. I mean, we need to figure out some way to get these companies all print money. I mean, they make hundreds of billions of dollars in profit collectively every year. If they want to come in and you know be taking advantage of our abundant resources in wind and solar, let's have a conversation about how they can use some of those profits to clean the water that they're using. Maybe they can use some of the surface water instead, and maybe get a twofer there. But it absolutely should be a part of the conversation.
So Deb, I'm really glad you brought this up, because right now we aren't at a point where that is part of the conversation. We are at the point in the conversation where we still need to know, we need to map our aquifer system, and we need to know exactly what resources we have. We need to know how abundant or not abundant they are. The fact is that there are many other states that have done this work, and then it is taken into consideration when planning for the future, because as you said, while yes, technically an aquifer is replenishable, it is not replenishable on like a human timeline. It is replenishable on a universal timeline. The Iowa Flood Center and the IIHR have been doing incredible advocacy work to explain this over the past, I would say, years to the legislature. There was a small appropriation made last year to begin that work, but the fact is that it's going to take funds to do that mapping project, to gather the data we need to know what the impact is, and it's not happening at the rate or the scale that we need to get ahead of the projects that are coming in that are going to directly impact those resources. And so from my perspective, that's something that we need to be pushing on a daily basis for those funds for the Flood Center to finish that work, so that we know what those resources are before we spend them.
We should have done it before ethanol plants came in.
Don't disagree.
Yeah, I just had a Joe Bolcom flashback. And that was the true cost of ethanol, the true cost of draining our Jordan aquifers. And I think that's a discussion we need to have more often, or more out in the open when we recruit businesses to come to Iowa. Because does the cost of implementing ever offset itself? In my humble opinion, no.
Well, and it's not required. There's a data center that went in Wisconsin in 2024 that has a closed loop system for their water resources. And so they are able, yes, it's more expensive up front, but they are able to avoid consistently and constantly drawing more water. Sorry, this is something I got real into this from the...
I can tell. I'm going to move on.
They are able to avoid consistently and constantly drawing more water, more of that resource. And maybe that's something that if we had a strong Iowa Utility Commission, we might require of some of the folks that are coming in here, but at present we are not doing.
Yeah, and my understanding is that that it may be that the new one that's going in Cedar Rapids is doing that.
I have heard
But-
that raised.
But I mean, we're facing another sort of cart before horse question. There are many cart before horse questions facing the legislature. Another one of them, as we talk about trying to increase funding for things, is the fact that we're already running a deficit budget, because having cut the income tax and having gone to this so-called flat tax, the goal, the governor's goal, and the goal of many of our Republican colleagues is to sort of make it all fit within the revenue that is projected to come in. All of the governor's budget is bigger than the proposed revenues for the next couple of fiscal years, rather than figure out what sort of model will actually work for Iowa. And she's applied the same overlay to her so-called DOGE commission, which is, what does she want it to do? She wants it to make sure that everything we do won't endanger the new taxation regime, as opposed to figuring out what is going to help Iowans in all areas and work best for us.
Great, you have really important issues.
Please speak up into the microphone.
Yes, is the microphone working?
The microphone is not going into.
Yeah,
it's
so
going
I'll
into-
just talk.
But it,
because-
no, but
yes,
but it is
I
going,
can talk a
it is
lot.
going
People
to,
are watching.
it is going to the online.
You need
Okay,
to do both.
great.
Yeah.
So, and I will certainly follow up with each of you regarding the status of our grants to make sure you're aware. But on another issue that's not just affecting our organization, food miles, we know that how far our food comes impacts our environment and our water quality, our soil, impacts climate change, but also tariffs, inflation right now. Families can't afford grocery store food, and we know that supporting our local food systems is what is going to reduce our carbon footprint. So I would like to know what legislative efforts are being supported to promote locally grown food and land access for those who want to grow food in our communities.
I believe that IDOLS is, and I can't remember what the name of their program is.
Choose
but
Iowa.
Choose
Choose
Iowa.
Iowa, that they've actually asked for an increase in the budget of Choose Iowa, which has been very successful, and I was very happy to see that.
Yeah, this is not, I would say at the moment, so much of a legislative issue as an agency issue. And there's really good work that's been done by a wide variety of folks, but particularly the Iowa Farmers Union, I know, has really led on expanding Choose Iowa, and that's something that has had great results, but also has the potential to do so much more. There's also local grocery grant program conversations going on. I don't remember whether that's within the Economic Development Authority or within IDOLS. It might be both. And that's something that I'm kind of watching and hoping to see move forward.
I'll also just note, on Thursday, there was a bill introduced by Representative Carter Nordman, who's the Republican chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, that would micromanage what Iowa families who receive SNAP benefits can buy with those benefits. And I just think at a time when grocery prices have exploded like they have, the idea that Republicans think they should micromanage the budget of Iowans who are trying to feed their family, it's just frankly disgusting. And so there's going to be a lot of efforts to oppose that legislation. It's been tried in the past as well. And I'd ask you to join us on that because I think we can trust Iowans to know how to feed their families.
I mean, I think we've seen that in the Senate before. The one piece of that bill that is actually good and passed separately in the Senate is to expand double up food bucks, so that folks who are using SNAP can get more money to buy, get more money so that they can purchase healthy, locally grown foods.
And that's in that bill to try and get a few people to yes who would otherwise be no. It's a bad bill with a little sweetener in it.
Right, but there was a separate bill
Yes,
just on
yeah.
double up food
And we've
bucks
had-
that I
yeah.
know went through committee on the Senate side.
Hi, my name's Miriam Kasha. I'm an Iowa City resident. Thank you for being here. And I'm a retired psychotherapist, and that's why I'm standing at this podium right now. I'm concerned about you.
Thank you.
you have an opening Tuesday at 10?
You have session.
You know, I can't
Thursday.
imagine what it's like to every day beat your head against the wall and feel thwarted and handcuffed, no matter what you try to do. So thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Susan Ansel. I'm from Iowa City and also a member of the League of Women Voters, but I'm speaking here personally. I understand that we have a bit of a surplus in our Iowa Treasury still, just a tiny bit, and like $2 to $3 billion. I sort of get lost on the numbers. I would like to point out that I think it is obscene that we have that amount of money in the budget, or not in the budget, but in our bank account that is just sitting there. That speaks to me of greed on the part of an administration that sits on top of money that we have already paid through sales tax, property taxes, and income taxes to go to programs in this state. I would like to hear your creative ideas for what we might do with that $2 to $3 billion surplus to get it back to the people, back to improving the state, rather than cutting property taxes.
So super quick. The budget that Republicans have proposed is going to take a big bite out of what's there, in part because income tax receipts are starting to really decline rapidly because of the tax cut that they gave, and with the biggest beneficiaries of which were obviously the wealthiest Iowans. So while the point is exceptionally well taken, that surplus, which by the way, this is actually mostly not, tax dollars that you and I have paid. That's mostly Biden bucks that were socked away effectively. And so there's one-time money, and it's going to go away very fast. Now, if I had a magic wand and I could pick one thing to spend it on, I think a bunch of us probably just like put that into IWell so we can get to work on actually solving these problems, given that it's just sitting there. But I think it unfortunately, and again, so this year, the reason that the spending on vouchers is going up 44% is because the Republicans when they wrote the law into place, they basically, each year that goes by, the income limits for whether or not you qualify for the voucher get progressively higher, and then this year they go off entirely. So if you were, one of the wealthiest Iowans who had your child in private school for the last 3 years, now you're getting a check from the state to pay for your tuition, which, by the way, probably also went up during that time, so it won't actually accomplish the stated intention of the program, which, is something that we've been talking about the whole time. And so, the budget is in, we have this surplus now, but it is not going to last. And the fact that that's happening when unemployment is, under 4%, it's a blinking red light for the state.
I'll just say about our budget, Iowans elected an auditor, Rob Sand, to be our watchdog and to look for waste, fraud, and abuse in government. A couple years ago, the governor passed legislation that stops him from being able to look into the executive branch. This year, to suck up to Trump, she introduced this Iowa Department of Government Efficiency that is led by one of her biggest donors, who was not elected by Iowans to tackle waste, fraud, and abuse.
Ringing a bell, anybody?
A couple weeks ago, I sent a letter to Emily Schmidt, who is leading that task force, asking her to look into what I see as the two most wasteful parts of Iowa's government. Number one, the voucher program, $1 billion with absolutely no oversight. Number two, the privatization of Medicaid, which has consistently gone over budget, has failed to save Iowans the money that was promised. And Auditor Sand a couple years ago put out a report that pointed out that the number of cases in which judges found improper denial of claims went up 891% after the privatization of Medicaid. And so I still have not received a response to my letter.
Shocked.
But I will say, if you look at where Republicans' priorities are, it is look at their budget, and it's sending the richest family in Des Moines money that may or may not be used for private education, and the privatization of Medicaid. I think we could be doing a whole lot better when it comes to funding our public schools, when it comes to ensuring that Iowans have access to mental health care, to pediatric dentistry. At the current rate, there is one provider in eastern Iowa that actually accepts Medicaid for pediatric dentistry, which we know has one of the best returns on investment of anything government can do. And so I think that their priorities are completely wrong when it comes to the budget.
I'm going to take the question as asked and do the fun thing. We are the lowest in the nation for public lands, and so kind of as Senator Walz said, I would put a big chunk of those funds into acquiring and preserving and investing in public lands, probably through I will, personally.
I love Doji. What a better way to be more efficient than create another damn program. It makes absolutely no sense. Just a reminder too, property taxes do not go to the state level. Property taxes, usually in this order, help our schools, help our cities, and help our counties. Though at the state level, we think we know more better than local government does, and we don't.
Not we.
They. Thank you.
The state,
Sarah.
of course, backfills what has been taken away in
sometimes.
terms of property.
Yeah, it used to be. Yeah.
Occasionally.
But we really don't anymore. They usually don't anymore. But and the number one funding stream for the state is the income tax and sales tax coming in a somewhat second. And it was mentioned before, there is a surplus, but that surplus will not be here in 2027.
Yep.
That surplus will be gone. And it is a lot of money. I believe us sitting up here, us five, have much different priorities than what Reynolds and the Republican do right now on how we would invest that money. And as Zach also said, it's one-time monies. This is the federal money to bail us out of COVID. And I know we keep saying it, trust me, in 2028 and 27, 28 fiscal year, we're going to fall off a cliff. And there's going to be some real repercussions from the unfunded mandates that we've shoved on counties, cities, and schools.
So to answer your question, in addition to what my colleagues suggested, if I had a magic wand, I would, as both House and Senate Democrats proposed, I'd increase state supplemental aid to public schools to at least 5% this year. Because if it gets funded at either of the rates that's being proposed, you're going to have almost half of Iowa's school districts on budget guarantee. And what that means in practical terms is that the school board then has the ability to raise property taxes to pay for what they need, which isn't actually what I thought Republicans meant when they said they wanted to work on property taxes this year. I put some of it into housing. The Senate Democrats also rolled out a housing package this year, this past week, to focus in particular on three things like down payment assistance, rehabbing assistance, and also for ADA, and a program that will vet the outside hedge funds and other funds that just want to gobble up various forms of affordable housing like manufactured housing and single family homes to raise money on, and then they hike the costs up so they would not be allowed to do that anymore. And finally, I would put some in childcare to raise wages across the board.
If I had a magic wand, I'd make some people disappear.
Thank you.
You're on camera, dude.
Oh. Shucks, this is recorded.
He didn't say who. It's fine.
Good one.
Speak way up, Anne-Marie.
Okay, so I'm Anne-Marie Krause from Iowa City. This is more a comment that I'd like you to comment on. This week on Iowa Public Radio, on River to River program, they played a short clip of Senator Grassley in which he expressed some sympathy for the situation of all the federal cuts, especially with the people losing their jobs. But the Senate can do absolutely nothing about it. And maybe you could give us some words to hold their feet to the fire or something. I've been making daily calls to my two senators and my representative, and
Here's a word: impoundment. That's
How
a
about
word.
the Constitution of the United States of America? I mean,
Rule of
for
law.
God's sakes, they are a co-equal branch of government. And all it would take is like 3 House Republicans, including Marionette Miller Meeks, or 3 Senate Republicans to grow a spine.
They could have not confirmed some of the cabinet nominees. They could not confirm the person who's about to be shoved through as the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They could not. They could. The Democrats, for sure, I believe, will put holds on on any nominees they're able to at this point. But they can do hearings. They can issue subpoenas. They can support lawsuits. There is a lot more that he can do than plead with the president to not put a 25% tariff on the 80% of potash that comes from Canada for our fertilizer. There is a lot. They have the bully pulpit. And frankly, when I think of our federal delegation, the one I am most puzzled about is Senator Grassley, who has not stood up for the inspectors general, who has not stood up for the JAG folks who are just being fired, and who really has nothing to lose aside from his reputation. It's not like he's going to run for office again.
Well,
it's only 6-year terms. So.
Chuck Grassley at this point represents everything that is wrong with Washington, D.C., which is so disappointing because I know there were so many Iowans who looked up to Senator Grassley when he was first elected. He ran as a reformer, someone who, when he was elected, was campaigning about things like $70 hammers at the Pentagon. You know, things that were, I think a lot of Iowans looked at that and said, I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, that's wrong and we should take a look at that. And to see the arc of his career, I mean, it's in some respects, it's very sad. I mean, I would probably really go back to 2009, 2010, the first Obama term, when he decided to oppose the nomination of Justice Sotomayor, which is the first time in his career that he had ever opposed a Supreme Court nomination. And you've seen over the last 15 years his slide from being an independent voice for Iowans to someone who negotiated in bad faith on Obamacare, who then got behind Donald Trump, something that would have seemed, I think, been unimaginable, 15 years ago. And now, he's been like reduced to sending tweets like, please don't do the tariffs, and it's like, man, you are personally shepherding the nomination of Kash Patel through the U.S. Senate, a man who has published a literal enemies list to be the next director of the FBI. You have power. Do something. And it's a really sad story, and it's happening at the expense of a lot of Iowans and people all over this country.
To your point, Zach, he refused to even meet with Merrick Garland when he was nominated to be a Supreme Court justice. And when I wrote to him, because his voicemail box was full, when I wrote to him asking him specifically to oppose the nominations of people like Gabbard and Kash Patel, his staff wrote back in a clearly cut and pasted letter, because it was different fonts, that Patel had been thoroughly vetted. And I wrote back and said, with all due respect, Senator, the financial disclosures that he filed after the deadline show funds from China, funds from others. He has not been fully vetted, and you can take the lead in ensuring that the FBI is not destroyed.
Yeah.
And the deal that Marionette Miller Meeks, Chuck Grassley, Joni Ernst are making is that it's worth it to, get rid of safety people at the FAA and make our planes less safe. Get rid of people, inspecting baby food at the FDA, so that they can give tax cuts to Trump and his billionaire buddies. That is the deal they've made. And I, for one, am committed to doing everything I can so that Marionette Miller Meeks does not go back to Congress in 2026.
Okay, Peter?
I want to turn the direction here. One of the things about Citizens Climate Lobby, which Iowa City Climate Advocates is a chapter of, is that we are nonpartisan. And I have plenty of personal feelings about various politicians. And I make use of those in my communications with them. But as a member of Citizens Climate Lobby, I believe that it's true that we cannot get good climate policy that's partisan. It has to be bipartisan to be resilient and stay there. And Zach, we've talked about this a little bit, and you gave me some good examples. But there's a lot that can be done a little below the political radar, where, and Eleanor, you also gave an example with a Republican who you talked to. I'd be interested to hear examples of where you have had or see the possibility of some success of bipartisan efforts that can address the environmental issues that have been discussed here.
So if you view, I mean, I talk to people all the time at the subcommittee level and others on the side to try and make bills better, to try and make them less bad. If you want to come back to the cancer issue, because ultimately that is really, if we get into the research, that is an environmental issue and should be a nonpartisan issue. I've been talking to Senator Clemish from Spillville since the beginning of session. You're on Human Resources, aren't you? So, and he promised me at the beginning of the session that he was going to file a bill that would deal with cancer research funds, because I knew that, you know, for no matter who I talk to, nobody's going to run my bill. And he did file this past week his bill that is would create a new tax on vaping products and that are currently untaxed, and some other tobacco products that are currently untaxed, with most of the funds coming from it earmarked for cancer research. And when I asked him how much he thought that would be, he said around $5 million a year, although not 100% of it would, some of it would go to some other things. But did that already go through committee or just through subcommittee? I think it's been
not gone through committee.
I think it's already been through subcommittee. And so, I mean, I support Senator Clemish's bill, and I hope that it makes it not just through the Senate, but through the House as well.
That's great.
So House Study Bill 193 has a subcommittee on Wednesday morning in the local government committee. It is the bill that would allow Johnson County to explore the creation of a regional transit authority that would allow us to have more transit lines that connect Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, Tiffin. I think particularly with the new hospital in North Liberty, now is a really great time for that conversation. Currently in Iowa code, only counties with above 175,000 population are able to have cities within the county enter into these agreements. And this bill would get rid of that requirement. I'm really thankful to our chair, Megan Jones, who's a Republican, who has worked with me on this legislation and has given it a hearing. And I think one simple thing you can do today that would help get this bill passed and help our climate is reach out to Representative Jones, thank her for giving this bill a subcommittee. You can go to House Study Bill 193 on the legislative website and file a public comment. And if you can be there on Wednesday at the cheery hour of 8 in the morning in Des Moines, I think it would be really, really meaningful to help get this bill across the finish line.
You mentioned going underneath the radar a little bit, but I'll be honest with you what that looks like. Because I, on the Democrat side, I'm working with Dr. Baith, state rep out of Polk County, on investments into cancer research. Here's what the trade-off is. For us to be at the table with Republicans, we cannot mention water. So that's where we are, Peter, just so you know that. And that's what we're willing to do because we are invested in cancer research, and this focuses cancer research for our young people, children, but when you say under the radar, that's part of under the radar. And I don't know if you notice, sometimes it's hard for me to keep my mouth shut. And I just want to sit there and go, water, 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 water. But you can't, because that's part of what we're doing to move the needle for cancer research.
I get that.
Yeah, I think you're right about, like, a lot of the actual potential on a short-term basis is not in legislation. It's in the agencies, it's in conversations, it's in research and studies, and presentations that come to the legislature, and they don't get to do that if they scare people. And so we have had some really fantastic conversations and presentations that bring to light specifics and facts and data. And we've heard some of the members of the committee push back on the facts that are being presented because they don't match their personal experience or their anecdotal evidence from their own backyard. And that broadened perspective for those who are open-minded enough to listen, I think helps us to then have those conversations that Representative Jacoby and others have spoken about. But short term, I don't see it necessarily being legislative. I see it being some of the IDOL's work and some of the stuff that's cloaked in economic development work and things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Barbara Helmick. Just a really fast another comment about dealing with our federal level representatives. I know we're all frustrated. You can't get through on the phone. You write an email. They respond to it 2 weeks later. You can't even, it's such a vague answer. What was that I wrote to them about? There's a lot of people who are now going to their in-state offices. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. We got 9 people go to Grassley's Des Moines staff. The office director talked to us for an hour. She was polite. I know other times she went down in the lobby and just met people in the lobby. But it's another way, make their jobs either miserable or uncomfortable, but it's another way to try to get to them. A second point is you are all awesome. Maybe someday you'll run for higher office.
Barbara, if I can just underscore one point. I mean, I understand that it can feel somewhat fatalistic reaching out, not getting a response, not getting a clear answer. But I will say it is super important, right? Because what's currently happening is the Trump administration and Elon Musk are doing a lot of very unpopular things. And what the current members of our delegation are trying to do is to evade being pinned down and delivering a clear answer that indicates either support or opposition to what is happening. Eventually, they do have to actually face questions, and so the volume of outreach is really important. So thank you for what you're doing in terms of reaching out and being engaged in that process. Even if you are still getting stonewalled or poor or unclear answers, now keep it up, because eventually they are going to have to get on the record, and it is those responses, when eventually they do happen, that are going to be an important part of how we talk with Iowans in 2026 about whether or not they support the chaos that is happening in Washington, D.C. right now.
Okay. Go ahead.
Welcome back.
As a retired teacher librarian in the Iowa City Public Schools.
Speak up again.
As a retired teacher librarian in the Iowa City Public Schools, I'm always trying to keep an eye on all the education bills passing through the House and
Good
Senate.
luck.
And for years, I have been baffled. A lot of times I'll spend a lot of energy writing about a certain bill that I have an issue with, and find out, oh, well, that bill went down some other fork in the road or whatever, and it's not even an issue anymore. But if you want to comment on any of the bills, please do, and I'm particularly interested in Senate File 235, which removes protections for teachers and librarians who provide all this pornographic literature to their students.
Yeah, I think Senate File 235 is a bill that was introduced by Senator Salmon. I don't know if it's had a subcommittee, but I don't expect that that particular bill will go anywhere. There are plenty of others that have some similar language in it that may go somewhere, but I don't think that one is going anywhere.
It's been scheduled for the 25th, which is Tuesday next week at 10 a.m. If you go to the legislative website and you pull up the calendar for next Tuesday, you'll be able to see all of the bills that are in subcommittee that day. And if you click on Senate File 235, there's an agenda button. That agenda button is a Zoom link on it. You can click on the Zoom link, and then as a member of the public, you can zoom in from home and offer comments on the legislation.
In the Senate.
In the Senate. You can't do that
You
in
can't
the
do that
House.
on House bills.
But
you can do
please-
it on Senate bills.
So, but if you're going to Zoom in and you want to be let in and you potentially want to speak, please make sure that your Zoom is labeled with your first and last name, and that you weirdly capitalize your first and last names, because they are now not necessarily letting in everybody who doesn't use don't ask. But anyway, just so you all know, if you want, but then what the subcommittee chair should do is say, if you are on Zoom and you would like to comment, please raise your virtual hand and we will get around to you.
And just kind of on that point, we had some follow-up conversations with the league about doing some kind of tutorial on the legislative website. We're still trying to figure out the right way to do that, but we're still trying to figure out how to make that happen.
Anne Marie, thank you. I know you and I have kind of had a little back and forth on your list of bills you're trying to follow, and I just wanted to say in person, thank you for your work trying to keep up with the insanity, because that's our job. It's not yours, and you should be able to trust that the legislature has your best interest at heart, and the fact that it doesn't is, I want to apologize for that.
One thing you all ought to be careful of is that the House tends to run about a zillion bills and the Senate does not. So while some things will go the other way, while the Senate will pass something crazy that the House will then also pass, it may be sort of a better barometer to say what is the Senate of all these crazy bills that have made it out of committee or have been voted on the floor in the House, which ones are actually ever going to get a committee, subcommittee, committee hearing and a floor vote in the Senate, because it's a much smaller subset.
Brad Friedoff, Johnson County, Coralville resident. Question on the Forest Reserve bill. We're trying to do all these great things with tax reform, but we're putting it on the back of very important parcels of land that are in private ownership that provide tons of ecological value, services, air quality, water quality, and the amount of money that they are going to generate by taking that Forest Reserve program out and begin taxing that is so minuscule. What can be done to stop that or dissuade them from increasing that?
This is SF-17, Brad. Yes. For what it's worth, they've scheduled a subcommittee on it back in January. I don't think Ways has met yet. Ways and Means normally doesn't meet until after. So the bills that are deal with taxes aren't subject to the same deadlines as everything else. So they typically start meeting in March, and then we'll go March and April.
They'll get their funnel stuff through.
Yeah, that's right. First funnel's March 7th. So my guess is that Ways will meet the week or two after that. Look, I think that's a totally reasonable question. Thankfully for you, one of the senators from Johnson County is on that bill. Unfortunately for us, she's not here today. But I think you should for sure reach out to Senator Driscoll and talk to her about it.
Was she invited?
She didn't. She turned it down.
So yeah. Anyway, you should for sure reach out to Senator Driscoll and ask for some
the
conversation.
Forest Reserve program, for everyone's knowledge, is a program that you don't pay property taxes if you leave land in Forest Reserve. I believe it dates back to like 1906. So it's a really long-standing program, and if you think about what that means, it means some really old trees that we want to keep. I'm not on the committee anymore, but the last 2 years I was the lead Democrat on the Natural Resources Committee, and I was continuously amazed how much the members of the public want access to public lands and the outdoors and the beauty that our state has to offer. This year, there was a conservation bond on the ballot. It received 78% of the vote, which I believe was more than any candidate on the ballot in Johnson County. And so this is a really big deal for people to have access to the outdoors, and the continued Republican attacks on public lands and then programs like the Forest Reserve program it's really wrongheaded.
I think you have a benefit in that it is my understanding when this came up 2 years ago that there are some House members benefiting from that program, and I think they are good, quiet advocates for it. I don't have personal names or anything, but yeah.
I really appreciate Adam bringing up that the conservation bond beat me by 2 percentage points. We'll talk after the meeting. What confuses me to Brad's question is not only, I'm the ranking member on Ways and Means, and this comes up almost every year in different forums. What surprises me more is not the fact that they are given a tax break, which is very, very minuscule, but it's about private ownership of land and property rights. The people that own that land have the right to determine what goes on in that property. If they want to put that into conservation, my tang's all tangled up, that it's their right. It's a property rights question. And if people want to do that for conservation, then they should be allowed to. And it's just a stupid discussion from the get-go.
We have time for one more question. Does anyone else have one? Yes.
Good morning. My name is Pat Bowen, and I'm from Iowa City. And first, a comment that I'm very disappointed, as we all are in this room, that we don't have representation from those 3 Republicans that choose not to come. And so my question is, would it be helpful if we reached out to those 3 that represent Johnson County, even though they may not be our representative? Would it be helpful to email them, communicate to them in any way of our disgust that they don't even really want to represent, they don't want to come forward and tell us who they really are and what they're doing? And then, as I've been sitting here thinking about this all day, it's like, are there any other areas of the state where Republicans do show up for their people and do have Republican Democrats in a joint room like this? Is that even happening anywhere in the state? And if so, it's just sad that we cannot have that here in Johnson County.
Yeah, I mean, Barbara, when I was first elected, I represented all of Cedar County and several townships in Muscatine County, and made it a priority to spend a lot of time in Cedar County. I'd go to the Muscatine County Muscatine Community College forums that they held, even though I represented like 800 people in Muscatine County. I thought it was important to show up and to answer questions, and I was often the only Democrat, elected official who was on the panel or in the room. And look, you get different questions when you're in Muscatine County or Cedar County than you get when you're in Johnson County. You just do. But part of the job is showing up and answering questions from your constituents, and it's beyond disappointing. I think it's an abdication of duty and responsibility. And look, it's one thing, Representative Nielsen's sick. This is an anomaly for her. It's a different thing for it to be a pattern of absence, and it should be disqualifying.
You saw that during the election cycle, that people didn't show up to forums. I have offered 4 of our Republican colleagues to attend and participate in their forums. I have one response saying, sure, but it's a 6-hour drive, and I won't mention his name, John Wills. but it lives in Northwest Iowa. He said, "You sure you want to make the drive?" I said, "I'll be happy to." It doesn't have to be adversarial. Sometimes it's just different ways of looking at things, and there's going to be a handful of things that we agree on too. I think that's the opportunity we miss. And when it was asked by Peter earlier, that's an opportunity we miss at forums for some of these common denominators to come through and say, hey, this is something we can work on together. We're both all very busy, but let's work from this point forward to work at least on these topics. And so that's one thing I'm personally doing, reaching out, saying, I'll gladly travel to your forum. And in Johnson County, we could also have a forum in Tiffin, which is technically in the district for them, and in Johnson County, and maybe they would feel more welcome or be able to attend.
I want to give a little credit to the league, which has over the past 3 years done absolutely everything in its power to try and make these forums bipartisan, including holding forums in Hills, in Tiffin, in Washington. Sending certified letters to be sure that no legislator missed out on their invitation. There have been exceptional efforts taken by this body to make sure that all of us are invited and have access to the forums. The only bipartisan forum we've had recently is the Johnson County Ag Business Group Forum.
Also, just
that's the only one they showed up to.
Yes, that's the only one that has actually ended up being bipartisan. The only one that our Republican colleagues showed up to is the Johnson County Ag Business Group. So the fact that I will say, Pat, I appreciate the question so much, and I share your frustration. There are other parts of the state where there are more balanced forums. Sending an email telling someone you're disgusted about them, probably not going to change their mind.
But representative is not supposed to just be a job title. It's supposed to be the job description.
So, right,
and
that
Republican senator.
Right, Lynn County, they show up often. Cindy Golding sometimes shows up, doesn't? But
yes, she goes to all of them.
So Lynn County is a place where there is bipartisan participation. Scott County is a place where there is bipartisan participation. So it happens, and I mean, I think that reaching out to them is great. I agree with Representative Levin that maybe a productive way would be to say, really would appreciate hearing your voice on a few of the following issues, so that we can hear your views, so that we can get a more balanced picture, because we know that your party, we know your party's in charge right now. We need to hear from you too.
I mean, before redistricting, Representative Kaufman used to come to these forums up until COVID, and some of the best conversations I had were after the forum, when I would, talk with him on the side and say, can you explain this side issue to me? And we would have really good conversations. And honestly, that led to us having a decent relationship when I got into the legislature. And there's just no opportunity for that anymore.
Well, that was after the forum. During the forum, Representative Kaufman and I had fun too.
Yes.
So, but it was a good, conversation.
Yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you very much for all of these questions and those responses. It's been a very informative session. Thank you to everyone watching a live stream or on Facebook. We will conclude the forum with closing remarks from each of our legislators. Legislators will have 3 minutes for their remarks. We will begin with Senator Walz, District 43.
Thanks, Barb. Just thanks again to the to the league for organizing today's event, to the City of Coralville for opening their City Hall on a Saturday morning, and to all of you for taking time out of your lives to be here, and for all that you're doing in between these forums as well to stay engaged with the legislative process here in Iowa and to contact our federal delegation about our concerns. I thought we had some really great conversation. As always, if there's an issue that we didn't have the opportunity to get to today, you can feel free to email me. My legislative email address, which is zach.walls@legis.iowa.gov. Things are happening pretty fast, so it may take a day or two for us to get back to you, but we are doing our best to stay on top of all of the incoming email that we get. I really do think that the number one thing, if I could encourage folks to engage in the process here in Iowa over the next couple of weeks, would be around Senate Joint Resolution 6 and the Republican attempts to overturn I Will. It's really important that we all make our voices heard when it comes to protecting the progress that we made in 2010. And then secondly, I would again encourage folks to speak up on Senate Study Bill 1112, which is the governor's energy reform bill in the Senate, and HSB House Study Bill 123 over in the House. This is legislation that could have very profound impacts on something that affects all of us, whether you live in Alliance Service Territory, Mid-American Service Territory, or like me, you belong to a rural electric co-op. This is something that's going to affect virtually every single Iowan. And so it's important that we have the best and most robust discussion about this legislation that we can. I'm glad that we had the chance to dive into it today and to talk about the various ways that these utilities are regulated. And again, happy to answer any questions offline that folks might have about this process as it moves forward over the next coming weeks and months. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you. Senator Weiner?
Again, thank you all for coming. Thank you for holding the forum. I know there's a very well-attended competing event happening or about to happen right now in Iowa City at the Engler Theater, where Senator Bernie Sanders is doing a starting and sort of oligarchs tour. He was in Omaha last evening to overflow crowds. I personally think that is what needs to happen, both on the state both by those of us who are here, who are out doing town halls and listening posts, and also by members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, because sitting in Washington isn't going to help. Having them sit in Washington is going to help any of us right now. We need to be able, and we deserve to be able to have an actual conversation with the folks who are representing us in Washington, and they deserve and need to hear our voices, which is why I really appreciate all of you being here and all of you staying involved in this at the state level. Sometimes it may seem a little bit like a sideshow compared to what's going on in Washington, but it remains really important. There are lots of really key issues coming up. Some of the issues that we've talked about today, and there will be more coming forward. So everything as I watched a clip from AOC last evening, and she's doing a great job of getting out there, but her point is, whatever it feels like, in most ways we outnumber the folks who want to take rights away, who want to try and say, no, we're giving the money to the wealthy. So everything you do, every letter you write, every time you show up, every email you write, every phone call you make, just this drip, drip, drip constantly of whatever it is you are able to do and you choose to do, and the other people you talk to will make a difference at every single level. So mostly I just want to say thank you, and thank you for helping support us, and we will continue to tell the truth as best we can, and really appreciate your being here.
Thank you. Representative Jacoby?
I too truly appreciate you being here this morning. Your time is very valuable, and it's valuable for us to hear your comments and your thoughts. It also warms me up a bit because it's going to be 40 degrees today. And it's nice that we come home and it warms up at the same time. I want to thank John from Coral Vision being here recording us today. Just a reminder, every week I have a legislative update that runs on Coral Vision. It's usually a 2-minute sector that just points out what we're doing that week, and also reminds people, like I want to remind you now, if you're coming to visit the Capitol, please let us know. Send us an email or a text and let us know you're visiting, because I'd love to spend time with you at our Iowa State Capitol during your visit. And it's always nice to talk to someone So, again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Representative Levine?
Thank you so much. Thank you to the League and all the co-sponsoring agencies today. I think it's really vital and also hopeful to have a conversation around climate and the environment and water in the face of a lot of distractions. I would put in a request that y'all look to your friends and family and community members who are under attack. This coming week is going to be a lot for members of our immigrant community, for members of our LGBTQ community, particularly our trans community, for folks who are facing housing and food insecurity. And I would just say, you know, we had that beautiful moment taken to ask us about how we're doing. I would ask that you do that for those who are around you who might not be feeling a lot of love from the state capitol or from the federal capitol right now. And that's kind of on my mind at the moment. So keep paying attention, take breaks, drink a lot of water. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks again to everyone for being here. I really ran for the Iowa House because I'm a proud City High graduate, because I saw too many of my friends not finding what they wanted here in Iowa, leaving the state, and really thinking about how we could make Iowa a place where people can thrive, where young people want to stay, where our communities can grow. And so almost every time I meet with a group of young people, and I have the opportunity, just the other day, a group from City High came to the Capitol, I always ask them, like, are you planning to stay in Iowa, and what would make you more likely to stay? And when I first ran, I assumed that a lot of the issues would be about job opportunities, about the affordability and quality of public education and post-secondary education, about some of the freedom issues. The issue that comes up the most that I really didn't consider is access to the outdoors in our environment in our beautiful state. And so the work that you all are doing is about so much more than just the environment. It's about the future of our state. And I'm just really thankful to everyone in this room who was invested in that fight.
Thank you very much, all of you. Thanks to the Coralville Technology Support staff for recording this event and live streaming it on the League's Facebook page. Rebroadcasts of this forum will be run on Iowa City Channel 4, Coral Vision, and North Liberty TV. See their respective websites for programming. Our third legislative forum will take place at the North Liberty Council Chambers on March 29th from 9:30 until 11:30. The focus will be on citizenship and immigration. Please join us, and thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.